All right, so we're going to continue on with content from Module 3, uh, professional communication, specifically how to construct emails. This is one of your assignments, but some of the content in here will also be beneficial for your elevator speech that is coming up. So let's take a look at the objectives for this lecture. Identify the ways in which we communicate in a business setting. So there are a number of different ways that we can communicate and talk to each other and exchange ideas in a business setting. I want you to have this general understanding of how to go about that, how to communicate in a professional or business setting, and then you need to be able to tell the difference between good and bad communication in a business setting, and then what was successful and what's unsuccessful. I really like this quote. Whatever you do, however you construct your communication, do it in a way that it cannot be misunderstood. Because if there is a chance for communication to go wrong, it probably will go wrong. And so try to think out all the problems while you're constructing your communication or while you're communicating. That should be your goal. How can this not be misinterpreted? So let's dive into this first section for our first objective. So let's identify the forms of business communication. Um, there's a number of different ways to communicate: written, visual, oral, all of these things. Even when we're dealing with things face to face, we communicate with our body language. We want you to know this because this is going to go out to this is going to be in a situation where you'll find yourself frequently. So even if you're dealing with someone that you think may not be a professional setting just quite yet, they could always end up being a future employer or a future coworker. So always keep that in mind. So here's some ways to communicate face to face: email, phone, social media, texting. We'll talk about all these throughout this lecture. So let's talk about office etiquette briefly. Every business, every company, every organization has a culture. It may be something that is explicitly written down and talked about, or it may be kind of an unspoken rule. It may be something that has just organically been cultivated and created, but every business has a culture. You need to understand what the norms are for your business. The idea of office culture is definitely something that was established before you were even hired. Before you get there, you're walking into a pre-existing organizational culture or office culture. We talked about nonverbal communication. So if you were participating in interpersonal communication, so that is communication between you and a small number of people, usually around one or two other people, that is interpersonal communication. And that is an exchange of nonverbal communication as well as verbal communication. You can see a list of what nonverbal cues are there under that bullet point. And then also keep this in mind. You're going to be stepping into the workforce with a wide variety of different generations. You'll be working with alongside people that might be the same age as you. You might be working under or for people that are one or two generations older than you are. So understanding how to navigate that communication intergenerational and within your generation is important. So knowing the difference between saying the acceptability of saying "what's up" or needing to say "hello, sir" is important. Those are things you're going to have to feel out. So face to face, this idea of interpersonal communication, um, it's most effective when you want to make sure that there is understanding between the group, inside of the group, because you can pay attention to those nonverbal cues. So if the person is shaking their head, nodding, that might be a way for you to just say that I think this person's understanding my point. Um, Conversely, if you can tell by their body language that they're not quite getting it, you can help rectify that situation. but it's all about this interaction between the people within that group with interpersonal communication. There are some downsides. It's easy to get off track, go down a different tangent, and you kind of have to be sure that you're sticking to what needs to be done and what needs to be discussed. But great perk of face to face is that immediate feedback and that understanding of, does this person know what I'm talking about? Are we on the same page? This is a very common form email, extremely common. We get it almost daily, multiple times a day. We receive emails. You can see there why we receive and send emails so often. Um, it's so convenient that we use it. We might even overuse it. Lots of things that are beneficial. We can attach images or documents. We do see that it's less personal than face to face or even a phone conversation, but it can lead to misunderstandings or misinterpreted messages. I'm sure everyone can think about a time, even with text messaging, that you've read it the wrong way, or when you read it, that you put this tone, or um, you think that the person is saying it one way, but they really meant it a different way. We don't get some of those nonverbal cues when we're emailing or reading emails. One thing we can't tell is the tone of the person's voice or the inflections in that person's voice. So it can be hard to misunderstand emails. That's why it's so important, going back to that quote we began the lecture with, is that you write things and communicate in a way that there's no way that it can be misunderstood. That should always be your goal. One thing that I always find helpful is I'll read it in a different voice, not necessarily out loud, but in my head. So I'll read it in an angry voice, or I'll read it in a happy voice, and make sure that the meaning is the same no matter what voice I read it in. Phone calls. This is another way that we can kind of receive some feedback. We're missing out on those nonverbal cues, but we can still hear things like, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, great, yes, absolutely." We can pick up on those things to help determine if we're on the same page or if there's understanding between the group. Social media, it's becoming very common. Almost everyone has some type of social media account. Um, and so we're able to utilize that for communication as well. Allows for this written record to be provided, just like in emailing or texting. We have this record of what was said. Social media is great for teams to collaborate as well. Google Hangouts, Skyping with Group Skype, all of those things help to connect individuals who aren't probably not physically close to each other. Texting, extremely relevant now. I'm sure that everyone can think of an instance where they have texted their boss or texted someone that they work with, but it's extremely prevalent today. Provides for that written record of what was said. It can give the idea that what is communicated may not be extremely important. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. If it's something that is time sensitive, important, you need to have a strong record of what was said. Probably should go ahead and email. But if it's something that is quick, that you just need to inform somebody, and maybe in a less important setting, text is probably all right to do that. It does not allow for immediate feedback. We don't get that nonverbal communication coming back. We don't know the voice inflection or tone, so that can be a downside. So let's take a look at successful business communication. I think this is a great image of what one person is trying to say, wants to say, what the other person is actually interested in, and what is relevant to both people within this interpersonal situation is relevance, and it's only a small portion. So think about what's relevant. That's what we want to. That's what you need to talk about. I think this is fantastic, and I really hope that everybody uses this. It's a simple three-step process, three questions to ask when you're putting together an email or you're approaching someone to talk to them, I think it's fantastic. You can take a look at that email down there, the example down there. Um, uh, if you would like to use this as almost like a template for your email assignment, I think that's a fantastic idea. Strongly encourage you to use this and think about these 3 questions when you're composing your emails. You always want to keep in mind that people are busy. You don't want to, to hoard someone's time. You want to keep it brief. Everything that you do and all the words that you choose and how you choose to speak, keep the recipient in mind. Always want to thank people for their time. Just be courteous, and hopefully everyone understands the importance of keeping spelling errors and incorrect grammar out of their professional communication. I will take this time to say when you're conducting professional communication, don't use things like contractions. So don't, can't, won't. Spell those things out. All right, so this last section, differentiating between effective and unsuccessful business communication. So when it comes to written communication, uh, written text is permanent. Texts, emails, all that things, it stays there. We have a record of it, which is great. We can go back and see what was said. But the bad thing is typos, misspelling, grammatical errors. Those are there as well. We do not write as we speak in professional communication. Same thing with just the English language in general. It's become very informal the way that we speak. Much of the professional world relies heavily on written correspondence. So professional emails, here's a bad example. Hey, I need to drop a drop slip so I can drop my class, but you weren't around in your office before. When will you be around? Instead, how about this as a better example? So think about who your audience is, how they want you to communicate with them. I know that one big pet peeve of students is when they spend so much time to construct an email that is professional and they get a one-word response back from their professors, or they get an informal reply from their professors. It's going to go a long way if you take the time to construct a professional email. Your professors will notice it. And in fact, some of your professors in the Department of Ag won't even respond to an email unless it is professional and it goes by a set of their standards. They won't even reply. So just keep that in mind. Try not to get frustrated if you do receive something that's informal. We're probably trying to get you the answer and resolve the issue as quickly as possible for your sake and for our sake in terms of time. Presentations, so you're going to give an elevator speech, so keep some of these things in mind. And when you're working in other classes, just try to keep some of these things in mind. And I will say, if you get a second, watch the video that's in this folder. It's titled Just Wing It. It's Owen Wilson. I'm not sure what movie it is, but he's walking into a class of elementary school age kids and is just winging it. He's giving a speech for career day. So that's worst case scenario, is that you just go in there and wing it, especially for your elevator speech. Interpersonal communication, like I said, this is when you're face to face or in a very intimate setting, so maybe you and 1 or 2 other people. Keep these things in mind. You want to look like you're engaged. Be sure that you enter and exit the conversation confidently, and a handshake goes a long way to show that confidence. Introduce the purpose of your conversation. This kind of goes back to those 3 questions. Let the other person know, what are you looking for? How much time is this going to take? What kind of commitment are you asking from me? Try to get those things out as early as possible in that conversation, and then restate key ideas or information in different ways so that you can assure that there is understanding between you and the other person. So we're running a little bit long on this lecture. Uh, be sure you take a look at these objectives. Make sure that you feel like we've accomplished all three of these objectives. If you don't feel like you have a good grasp of them, please come to me. So what's next for you? Um, we have another tutorial. This one is a tutorial on how to create an email signature. We'll look at, and then take a look at some of the examples that I have in the folder on WT class of good examples of emails. Take a look at the grading rubric on how I'm going to grade your professional email. Then you'll need to construct an email, construct your email and send it for your grade for the assignment. Also want you to take a look at the grading rubric for the elevator speech, and you need to practice giving your speech because you need to make it to the 1.5 or 2 minute mark so that you don't miss out on some of those points. All right, so if you have any questions, you can always email me, find me after class, or stop by my office.